Hey, welcome to my devlog. I'm Dustin, and I'm working on a 3D sneaking game. I'm also working on a 3D action game about shifting between different realities, but this time we're talking about espionage. Let's check out what I've accomplished since last time. It's been a while since I've worked on this game. That's because the changes I've been making to the engine broke compatibility. After some deep thought, I decided to just use the engine from my other game. The engines were mostly the same, the only major differences being this game's custom level editor and that game's reality shifting features. The way I build the world for my other game is much more dynamic, and I feel the benefits are worth it even though I can't edit the world on the fly anymore. Since the engine is now the same across games, this game will be able to utilize the reality shifting tech now. I plan to utilize it for a particular boss fight in this game, and I could also utilize it for the thermal goggles mode. I make the entire world in Blender now. Using clever naming on nodes, I can utilize Blender's built-in linked references feature to import different objects. In this case, the door is actually a part of a completely separate file and is loaded separately from the game engine, but I can see exactly where it will be and how it will look inside of a Blender scene. I can also model all of my lighting directly in Blender and get a decent preview of how it's going to look in-engine. I just export it to the source assets folder, and the next time I run the game in debug mode, the world compiler will automatically find any changed assets and recreate the world for me. Once the game was working again, I started working on the advanced camera features. The camera will now focus on you when you're pressed up against a wall, and let you look over your shoulder when you're near a corner. I made sure looking around corners only activates when it will actually benefit you. If the field of view isn't better, then the camera won't move, as shown here. After that, I decided to add camera occlusion checking. I didn't want to have the character glow through walls using a shader, or have the wall turn transparent when you're behind it, because this game is going to be about using the camera to get the best view of your surroundings that you possibly can. Since the camera is so important, I added the ability for the player to pan it around no matter what mode you're in. My goal is to give the player enough control over their sight that adding a radar to this game will be completely unnecessary. The radar is very iconic to this type of game, so I'll probably have it available in some form or another, but I want the player to feel like having it on is just a silly waste of screen space. While working on the occlusion camera, I ran into a bunch of problems where the camera would get triggered into the occlusion mode in places that I definitely did not want it to. Looking here, you see the camera will freak out at certain locations in front of this door. And if we stand in one of those specific spots, the camera will stay in occlusion mode. This is not a bug. This is just how the levels happen to be created. If we turn on collision debugging, you'll see there's a giant chunk of geometry that isn't actually being rendered. The occlusion mode is being triggered because the camera can't see the player through this blue door frame. This is a huge problem. It's a design problem, and it's something that I've been wanting to solve for a long time. This problem doesn't actually have anything to do with the camera. The problem is that I don't have the ability to assign specific parts of the level any attributes. I'll get into what that actually means in a minute, but first, let's get a quick workout in. If you haven't subscribed yet, now is a perfect time to click that button. Today is pull day.
I'm walking alone, the streets are empty. The only thing I can see is my own silhouette. I'm getting stronger, step by step. The clock is ticking, but there's no time for regrets. I've been flying from town to town, from London to Taiwan. I've been all around the globe, trying to protect your soul. We are heroes tonight.
Okay, so what do I mean by attributes? Have you noticed how in a lot of games when you're walking around, your footprint sound effects will be different depending on what material you're actually walking on? That's because the game engine is aware of what material is assigned to what part of the floor, and this usually happens without needing to access the GPU at all. A lot of engines will do this by assigning attributes to the actual collision geometry, keeping everything on the CPU side. You might wonder how this will help me with my camera problem, and let's go ahead and figure that out. The first thing I needed to do was figure out how to get attributes into my engine. This means I need to store the information on the collision geometry in Blender in some way. My first thought was to use vertex colors. But since I'm not using vertex colors in my engine at all, that would end up being a lot of extra work. So I settled on storing the information in UV sets. I created a 5x5 texture with unique colors. This gives me a total of 25 possible values per UV set. Using standard texture mapping, I can now assign the collision geometry a unique value for every single face. And utilizing multiple UV sets, I can give every face multiple different values. The asset compiler will then parse every single UV set into a single value of 1 to 25. Then utilizing a bit mask, I can store all of these UV sets into a single 32-bit integer on the collision geometry. And just like that, I can assign every single triangle on the collision geometry a nearly unlimited number of attributes. To start with, I created two attributes. One will prevent the camera from entering occlusion mode, and the other will allow the player to press against that surface. Looking at this geometry here, the red indicates walls that the player is allowed to press against. Black is simply a placeholder that has no value currently. When the character attempts to press against these walls that were marked black, they continue to run and the pressed against wall mode does not activate. But the walls that were marked red work as expected. With the ignore camera occlusion attribute assigned to the door frame, it no longer causes the camera to freak out. This is an extremely powerful tool and I'm really excited to finally have it in my engine. As mentioned before, I'll be able to use this to change the sound effect your footprints make. I can also use it to identify hazards such as electrified floors, or railings, or fences, or a water puddle. If you're interested in hanging out, I've opened up a Discord server, link in the description. But that's it for this devlog. Stay motivated, kill your lifts, and I'll see you next time.